There was once a 17-year-old girl that sat in her SAT prep class dreaming of travel and adventures. She dreamt about moving away and doing exciting things. Shortly after, she found herself at the recruiter's office and had signed up for the Air Force before she had even turned 18. Oh, how she couldn't wait for her adventure to begin. Yes, that 17-year-old was me. Hi, I'm Laurie Anderson, and today I'm going to tell you a little bit about my 14-year journey since I joined the Air Force, and a few things I've learned along the way. I broke my journey into 3 parts: the adventure begins, the growing years, and the downhill slide. Let's begin this adventure. When I arrived at Lackland Air Force Base, Texas for basic training, I was the first one off the bus. I was so excited. Then reality hit as the TI started screaming at me. One TI even grabbed my long hair and screamed, "I can't wait to cut this all off." What had I gotten myself into? 6 weeks later, I was on my way to Keesler Air Force Base, Texas for tech school as an information manager. For some reason, I was more nervous about arriving at tech school than basic training. Tech school was a breeze. The most exciting thing was to check the assignment board daily to see where my adventure was going to take me next. One day, I checked the board and my assignment was finally posted: Incirlik Air Base, Turkey. I didn't even know where Turkey was. Luckily, a friend from my class was Turkey-bound too, and I wouldn't have to go on this journey alone. After what seemed the longest flight ever, we arrived at our first base. While on the plane right over, a man warned us to beware of the military boys when we arrived. I laughed and said, "I don't want a military guy." First night there, someone came knocking on my door. I opened it, and a whole gaggle of guys were lined up to meet the 2 new girls. I guess I should have listened to the man on the plane. The next month was like one giant frat party. I was barely 19 and in a third world country far away from home. This is what I wanted, right? By the end of my 15-month tour, I had learned a lot. 4 months before I left, I met the man that 4 years later would be my husband. Yes, a military man. We both have follow-on assignments at Eglin Air Force Base, Florida. The only catch was I had to wait 10 months for him to arrive there. My adventure had already taken me across the world, but I was about to enter my growing years. And where did that take me? Right back to my home state of Florida at Eglin Air Force Base. Here I am, back in Florida where I began. At least I was still 7 hours from home. I waited my 10 months for my husband to arrive, or my future husband, and 2 weeks later I was flying halfway around the world again for my first deployment to Saudi Arabia. When I arrived at Saudi, Operation Desert Fox was just dying down, but one thing in particular I learned from this deployment was that the news doesn't always report what is truly going on. The second thing I learned was don't be the last girl in the tent or you will end up with the worst living area. Living with 9 girls in a tent for 2 months was quite the adventure. The third thing I learned was if you see a sandstorm coming, get out of the back of a pickup. On our return trip back to Eglin, we stopped in 6 different countries. Who knew I would have seen so much of the world by age 21? A little over a year later, I found myself headed back to Saudi. This time, my boyfriend was my fiancé, and he was already in Saudi waiting for me to arrive. We were planning to get married shortly after we returned from this deployment. When we arrived in Saudi this time, I was informed I would be in charge of driving everyone to and from work on a 42-passenger bus. You want me to drive this through these tiny barriers, I asked? If you ask my husband, I'm the worst driver ever, so for the Air Force to put 42 people's lives in my hands seemed crazy. This is when I learned that in the Air Force, you will do whatever job is needed. I managed the barriers, but I did knock an antenna off the bus one day while driving under some palm trees. The second thing I learned was it's not a good idea to deploy with your fiancé if you truly want to get married. This was definitely a test for us. Needless to say, we did end up married on June 23, 2001. Just 3 months later, our world would change as we watched the Twin Towers fall. Shortly after, I would be leaving again, but to an unexpected place. I was Iceland bound. Iceland was beautiful, but very cold and windy. I was to spend the next 100 days with 50 people from my squadron. I was one of 2 girls on this trip, and I was soon adopted by the crew chiefs. I learned to hang with the crew chiefs. You have to drink like a fish and party like a rock star, which I did. I did get to see what the crew chiefs did at work and launched my first F-15. I realized I was happy with my office job. The 100 days flew by with a breeze, and next thing I knew, I was back in sunny Florida. A year later, we were bound for Germany, my dream assignment and by far my favorite job. I worked at Headquarters United States Air Forces in Europe at Ramstein Air Base. I soon realized, even though I was now a staff sergeant, being at a headquarters job, I was the lowest ranking on staff. The next 3 years flew by as we traveled Europe and our son Mikey was born. I grew a lot during the past few assignments and deployments. I was about to enter my downhill slide, which is what I call the time after you hit your 10 years in the military. You're halfway there. We arrived at Hill Air Force Base, Utah after my past 3 years at my glamorous headquarters job. I was soon thrown into chaos. I was in charge of a small computer shop in a 500-person squadron. I had all new airmen that worked for me, and I had not had much computer or supervisor experience. The next 2 years, I had a crash course in computer repair and how to supervise. I had my butt chewed daily, and I was in the first sergeant and commander's office weekly for the many insane things my airmen tried to pull. One even decided to play jackass and put his foot out of a vehicle that was moving 40 miles per hour. I was wore out and frustrated and almost decided to get out of the military at my 11-year mark. I knew that if I hung in there, things would get better, and this was all going to teach me some valuable lessons. Shortly after I put on Tech Sergeant, I was popped with a no-notice assignment to United Arab Emirates. This was my first deployment that I went by myself and not with my squadron. I arrived at Norfolk to catch my flight to UAE, and I had 80 glaring eyes on me. I was about to spend the next couple of days flying over with 80 security forces members, and I was the only one that was not a cop. I should have felt safe, but my impression of security forces was not the best, and they were staring at me like I was some outsider. No one talked to me for the next couple of days until someone finally asked, "How did you get on this flight?" When we arrived, they in-processed me as security forces, and their leadership asked where my badge was. Had I just been augmented as a cop? Luckily, the operations group scooped me up, and away I went from the unfriendly cops. The first week there, I was miserable. People were not friendly, and I knew I needed to meet some friends. Shortly after that, I started running into my security forces peeps. I decided I would be friendly even if they were not, and I began to spark up conversations with everyone I came across. Next thing I knew, security forces had adopted me, and I had started a nightly running group training for a half marathon. I got to see what our defenders do, and I even let their military dogs practice attacking me. By the end of my deployment, I had networked with about half the people on base. I made it my goal to see what everyone else does so that I could see the big picture. When I left, the security forces squadron presented me with a brassard, and it said that I was a true defender at heart. To this day, that was the most meaningful gift I have received in my career. When I returned back to Utah, I felt I had grown. Then I found out I was moving to work at the maintenance group and be in charge of the whole maintenance group help desk. I used all my skills I had learned in the past couple years, and things went a lot more smoothly. My husband took a year assignment to the desert, and we got a follow-on assignment to Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson, Alaska. Our journey at Elmendorf has just begun, but so far I have put in a lot of hours, and I have good people working for me. I use my experiences I have learned in the past 14 years to guide my airmen and mentor them, and hopefully they will learn from their own adventures too. As you can see, the past 14 years have been full of adventure. From basic training to Turkey, the growing years at Eglin, Saudi, Iceland, and Ramstein, and the downhill slide in Utah, UAE, and now Alaska. Needless to say, that 17-year-old girl never took her SAT, but she learned more valuable lessons and experience from her journey than she probably would have from 4 years in college. Thank you for letting me share my experiences.